$23.3 billion. That's how much public money the US has spent on sports venues since the year 2000, and that number is only set to increase. In 2024 alone, proposed public subsidies totaled over $13 billion. Across America today, city halls are debating massive checks for sports stadiums. Local governments routinely pledge hundreds of millions of dollars to build or renovate stadiums and arenas. Behind the flashy ribbon cutting and pride of ownership talk lies a central question. Why do US cities keep sinking so much public money into sports venues? Today we'll talk all about the rise of public stadium subsidies and what it could mean for a city near you. Between 1970 and 2020, 135 new stadiums or arenas opened in the US and Canada, with taxpayers covering a median of 73% of the cost. Though cost sharing has improved, dropping the public share to around 44% by the 2010s, stadium costs have soared. In the 1990s, the average public contribution per project was about $168 million. Today, that figure exceeds $500 million, with total project costs now topping $2 billion. And there are so many recent examples of this. $380 million in public funding for the Athletics' planned Las Vegas Stadium, over $1 billion for a new Titan Stadium in Tennessee, and $500 million for ballpark upgrades in Milwaukee. Owners often leverage relocation threats to extract subsidies, and city officials, fearing political fallout, frequently concede, effectively bidding against each other with taxpayer dollars. City and team officials often highlight new stadiums' economic benefits: construction jobs, fan spending, tourism, and a multiplier effect from higher tax receipts on tickets, hotels, and restaurants, plus rising nearby property values. In practice, independent research tells a different story. A 2018 study covering 43 years of data across major leagues found local personal income grew by about 1.4% annually whether or not a city built a new stadium, concluding the net impact is weak or non-existent and can sometimes be negative. And this is just one of many different studies looking at economic statistics that tell a similar, sometimes more unfortunate story. Ultimately, team owners and investors gain the most, securing lucrative new facilities, while taxpayers can shoulder decades of financial burden. Public stadium deals typically rely on municipal bonds and new taxes. Cities issue tax-exempt bonds to fund construction, which are repaid over 20 to 30 years via sales, hotel, or car rental taxes, or even surcharges on tickets. From 2000 to 2020, the federal tax expenditure on these bonds totaled about $4.3 billion, effectively spreading costs nationwide. In Arlington, Texas, voters approved a 0.5-cent sales tax, 2% hotel tax, and a 5% car rental tax, all to fund AT&T Stadium. A 0.1% sales tax across 5 Wisconsin counties financed Miller Park for 25 years. And bonds can outlive venues. Over $100 million of debt from New Jersey's Giant Stadium remained after its 2010 demolition, payable only in 2021. Similarly, the Dome at America's Center in St. Louis had bonds retired in 2021 despite the Rams' 2016 departure. Allegiant Stadium opened in 2020, costing about $1.9 billion. Clark County covered roughly $700 million of it via hotel tax bonds, without any rent or profit sharing returned to taxpayers. The Raiders owner financed the rest through NFL loans and seat license sales. By contrast, SoFi Stadium, which also opened in 2020, cost $5.5 billion, the most expensive stadium ever built. Other than the $100 million as part of a tax reimbursement agreement for sewer, streets, and utilities, it was entirely privately financed by Stan Kroenke, demonstrating that in certain markets, owners can self-fund mega venues without tax-exempt bonds. The currently under construction new Highmark Stadium for the Buffalo Bills carries a $2.1 billion price tag, with New York State issuing $600 million in bonds and Erie County $250 million in what are being referred to as Bills bonds. Buffalo negotiated $3 million per year for 30 years in community benefits, which are promised future payments, not upfront funding. In Jacksonville, a $1.4 billion stadium project allocates $775 million in municipal bonds and tax revenue to the city. Tennessee's under construction $2.1 billion Titan Stadium will be funded by $500 million in state bonds and $760 million in Nashville Sports District bonds, which are repaid via sales and hotel taxes. This deal, which was signed a couple years ago, is set to be the single largest subsidy for a stadium in US history. And although new construction tends to grab more headlines, renovation projects can also rely on public funds. Baltimore's Camden Yards upgrade still cost Maryland about $14 million per year in debt service. And Alameda County spent $70 million on Coliseum renovations for the Raiders, which now seems pointless. As I mentioned before, cities argue new stadiums spark economic activity. Construction creates short-term jobs, game day visitors spend on hotels, restaurant, and retail, and venues can boost downtown foot traffic, attract conventions, and raise nearby property values. Proponents also point to civic pride and consumer surplus as intangible returns on investment. Further research continually finds that these gains rarely justify public cost. Foot traffic analyses estimate a median facility generates only $11 million annually for nearby businesses, trivial against $100 million subsidies, and have even been known to depress activity on game nights. Moreover, stadium debt crowds out public services. $500 million in bonds can cost over $20 million per year in debt service, reducing funds for police, schools, or transit. Critics note that the $33 billion spent on stadiums from 1970 to 2020 could have funded tens of thousands of police officers or teachers' salaries. With venues used only 40 to 60 days per year and generating limited spending, stadiums often shift rather than create economic activity. Despite minimal economic returns, stadium subsidies persist due to politics and psychology. Deals offer visible wins. Politicians can claim they saved the team or delivered a new arena, while funding transit or schools lacks appeal. This is why mayors frequently advocate for new stadiums alongside team owners, as seen in cities like Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Philadelphia. As the city's figurehead, the mayor often faces pressure to take action that will retain teams, whether from union leaders seeking increased construction jobs or entrepreneurs aiming to revitalize specific neighborhoods. In contrast, and although not true all the time, state legislators and city council members are generally less inclined to support publicly funded projects, as they tend to prioritize budgetary constraints and responsible spending. Costs spread thinly across taxpayers, but benefits accrue mostly to fans and nearby businesses. Owners leverage relocation threats and bidding wars, reinforcing groupthink. Cities outbid rivals or risk losing their franchise. One economist famously stated, "You can fit a majority of the city council in the owner's box, but you can't fit a majority of the electorate. When put to vote, people sometimes object." Kansas City rejected a sales tax for a new ballpark in April 2024, but defeats haven't stalled subsidies. One commentator warns that in 2024, America's on the cusp of the biggest publicly funded stadium boom ever. In 2024 alone, teams sought $3.4 billion from taxpayers for 2 venues, and that was only in Chicago. Now, neither of these proposals have been accepted, but asking for that much public money shows the way the trend seems to be headed. Comparing stadium subsidies to other uses highlights opportunity cost. Analysts note stadium debt acts as an invisible tax, displacing essentials from first responder gear to bus maintenance. Nevada teachers, ranked 48th nationally in per pupil funding, argue $380 million earmarked for a new ballpark would better support education. While stadiums deliver occasional boosts, public goods like highways or schools typically yield broader, longer-lasting social returns. This is not to say that every stadium deal is bad for a city. Compared to typical housing or commercial projects, well-executed stadiums can match or even exceed public returns on investment when paired with strong private follow-on development. Golden One Center in Sacramento required $223 million in public funds, yet generates around $25 million in annual tax revenue and supported $665 million in annual economic output. It also directly attracted over $7 billion in adjacent private development. A $223 million mixed-use housing project might yield $3 to $5 million in property taxes, but typically wouldn't trigger billions more in private investment. Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio, which opened in 2000, was entirely privately funded at $155 million. The city of Columbus contributed $44 million to public infrastructure like roads and sewers. Since then, independent analysis has credited the Arena District with approximately $300 million in annual economic impact, including $30 million in income tax revenue and over 14,000 district area jobs. Private follow-on investment has exceeded $2 billion, transforming a former brownfield into mixed-use housing, offices, retail, and entertainment venues. With under 20% public outlay relative to total development alongside a strategic urban planning framework, Columbus demonstrates how modest subsidies coupled with high private investment can deliver sustained economic benefits on par with or exceeding those from standard housing or commercial projects. In the end, stadium subsidies are a trade-off between short-term excitement and long-term cost. While they may boost civic pride, cities need to ask themselves, is this really worth it? At Buildcore, we're building America, one story at a time. We cover some of the most impressive and headline-grabbing projects and topics across this great country, and with your help, the channel has grown to over 40,000 subscribers and reached millions and millions of people. With that being said, thank you, and I'll see you next time.